I'll just say, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Paula Gilbert and Ebony Mapp from New York State Department of State for presenting this webinar entitled Skills That Make Great Board Members. I'll let them take it away.
Great. Okay, so welcome. It is 1:59, so we'll give it just another minute before we get started. But anyways, while we're waiting for Ebony to return, my name is Paula Gilbert. I'm one of the local government training specialists at the New York Department of State Division of Local Government Services. This is a course that I was asked to put together last year from one of our county planning planners who was asking for something really for new board members that were getting kind of dipping their toes in the water in terms of getting off the ground, but we also kind of tried to incorporate just skills in general that will help all board members as they serve their municipalities. So a lot of this, we cover a lot of different topics pretty generally. If you do have questions, feel free to ask them as we're doing this. And so I guess we'll get started. Ebony, have you returned?
I am back, yes.
Okay,
and I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh, good, and you have control of the screen. Do you want to try clicking forward just to see what happens?
Yeah, let's see.
Okay.
Yay, nice. There we go.
Awesome. All right, let's see if I can do this as well. Oh, I can. Okay, great. So we're all good on this. So, like we like to start with, welcome to the board. New York State is a home rule state, which means the majority of land use decisions are made on the local level, and local governments hold the power to regulate land. As a land use board member, the decisions you make will have a long and lasting impact on your community. This responsibility, of course, should not be taken lightly and is one of the really important reasons why well-skilled board members are so important in every community. So, as an overview, an effective board member knows the authority of the board and its duties, as well as the role and duties of other boards, like the governing board and planning or zoning boards. They understand their bylaws and rules of procedure and can act in a professional and ethical manner with their fellow board members, other boards, municipal staff, and of course, the public. They also have a solid understanding of municipal regulations, laws, and plans, including the comprehensive plan, zoning laws, and any other regulations you may have. They should know how to read and interpret plans and maps, conduct site visits, and know where to ask for help. We understand you don't necessarily need to know absolutely everything, but a good board member knows when they're in a little over their head and they need some assistance. It helps to be detail-oriented and naturally curious about your community and know what planning and development trends and pressures exist in your community as well. So we will touch base on all of these points this afternoon. So we'll start again with land use and local government. So land use control is one of the most, or maybe even the most important functions of local government. It can be obviously very polarizing and controversial for board members, for other local officials, for residents, for the public in general. However, it is important to remember that land use board members are just administering land use regulations as they're written. It's up to your local governing board to adopt and change regulations that allows development to be done done appropriately in your community. So again, there isn't a lot of wiggle room for local officials to interpret the laws as they are written. So it's important that you understand that as well. And I think we can say, so here we have a couple of headlines that I just pulled from a local paper here in Albany. Like Obviously, the local media likes to cover a lot of land use issues just because of the fact that it's such an important role in your community. So we know the job will be hard sometimes. You will have critics. Some of your decisions will be criticized, and you won't always agree with either the public or each other. But it's always good to keep in the back of your mind that passion that you have for the community, because I doubt you would volunteer your time in the evenings to serve if you didn't care about your community. And so just kind of wrapping up with the local government team over your course as, over your tenure as a land use board member, you'll work with obviously a variety of municipal staff members. Every municipality does this a little differently, but typically the people that you'll mostly work with are your municipal clerk. So they handle filing and posting of meetings. Your board secretary might be the person receiving applications that come before the board. They'll be checking for completeness and offering administrative support. Maybe they're the person that puts your meeting minutes together and or maybe the agenda. Your code or zoning enforcement officer, usually they're the person either making decisions about your zoning, and often they're the enforcement mechanism of your decision. So it's always good to have a good relationship with that person. If you are lucky to be in a community that has a planner or planning department, they often provide professional and technical support to boards. That could also be your county planners as well. I know a lot of upstate communities don't necessarily have the resources to have a planner on staff for their municipality alone, but you probably have a county planner as well as your regional planning council staff, and they are resources to reach out to when you have questions about applications before you. They're great resources. They're all professional planners by trade, so they understand your community a lot more than we might be able to assist at the Department of State. So always reach out to them and always have a good relationship with them. You might also have your municipal counsel, or maybe you have consulting attorneys that provide legal support to you. You may have a municipal engineer that does some review, especially like water and subdivision review, to make sure things are up to code for future developments. And then of course there's the chief administrator, whether they are a city mayor, a village mayor, or a town supervisor. They are the person that really handles the day-to-day operations of your municipality. And since I keep talking on and on about the different roles of each board, the next couple slides, we just take a brief look at each one of the primary functions of each one of the boards. So we'll start with the local governing board. They have, on the legislative side, the New York State Constitution grants local governments fairly broad home rule powers to adopt laws on various subjects. Local governments, of course, have control over their property affairs in government, and for mostly the purposes of land use, the buck really stops with the governing board. The police power is the power government has to provide for public order, peace, and to protect health, safety, and general welfare. Land use controls are an exercise of the police power. Local governing boards also create local laws, ordinances, and resolutions that relate to all matters of local governance. So for land use, this is where we're talking about adopting your comprehensive plan and your zoning regulations. And then, of course, on the administrative side, the governing board supervises departments of local government, obviously. They're also responsible for putting together an annual budget, which is, of course, incredibly important to keep your local government funded. They also handle contractual issues, so they enter into contracts and agreements. They also make your purchasing and procurement policies. And of course, for you guys as local planning and zoning board members, they have the power to appoint members of the planning board, the zoning board, your zoning enforcement officer, your building inspector, code enforcement officer, your attorney, secretary, pretty much anybody. And now I am going to turn it over to Ebony to talk about the planning and zoning board.
Okay, yes, I'll move that slide. And it didn't work. Let me try it again. There we go. Yay, it works. All right, so the primary functions of, I think I skipped one. Oh, the planning board, there we go. The planning board has both a regulatory and an advisory role in local government, and both apply to how land is used. That is their jurisdiction, that is their home, that's where the planning board stays, okay? So in their advisory role, the planning board can make official comments on any land use matter, whether they're asked or not, right? So they have the ability to say, I know this is going on at our local governing board, but we would like to, give you some, input on this. That could be with regard to the comprehensive plan. Let's say the governing board, let's say the planning board thinks that it's time to review or update the municipality's comprehensive plan because they're seeing trends in development applications and all of that give them the sense that that's something that needs to take place. Then they could certainly make that recommendation to their governing board. Because the governing board, even though they may or may not decide to do a comprehensive plan, the buck stops with them in terms of adopting it. So the planning board can certainly make a recommendation to them about whether the comprehensive plan should be updated. They can also provide input to the ZBA. Maybe the ZBA is looking at a variance application. The planning board, again, whether asked or not, can certainly provide some advisory opinion on the matter before that board. Now, in their regulatory role, that's where the governing board authorizes the planning board to review and make actual and binding decisions on specific land use matters. So that could be something like site plan review or special use permits. You might even think of the review of subdivisions as a regulatory power, and it is. But the difference here is that the authority to review subdivisions comes from New York State statute, not from the governing board, even though it is a regulatory power that the planning board has. So I wanted to make that quick distinction. Hope I didn't confuse anyone. But again, the planning board, 2 roles, advisory and regulatory. Now, if we're talking about the zoning board of appeals, if the slide would advance, let's see, there we go. Okay. So the Zoning Board of Appeals only has one role, and that is a regulatory role. And there's a key distinction in how it's carried out. There's kind of 2 components to that, the regulatory role that the ZBA has. One is called the appellate jurisdiction, and the other is called original jurisdiction. Now, for the appellate jurisdiction, these are land use matters that are referred to the ZBA from elsewhere. Usually it's from the zoning enforcement officer. So it'll be an applicant that had an interaction with the zoning enforcement officer that now requires them to take the next step or to go to the next level, and that would be to interact with the Zoning Board of Appeals. All ZBAs have appellate jurisdiction, okay? And when we're talking about appellate jurisdiction, we're talking about like the interpretation of zoning, that all invariances, invariances, yes, all ZBAs have the ability to work out of their appellate role, their appellate jurisdiction. Now, with original jurisdiction, these are land use matters that start or originate with the ZBA itself, and that could be, again, this is not an application that's referred to them from somewhere else. This is an application that starts with the ZBA, and that can be the review of site plans or special use permits. And again, that's something that comes from the governing board. The governing board can delegate the authority to the ZBA to review those types of applications. And again, because it's points for me. There we go. Okay, so this is just kind of common knowledge, but I'll just say it anyway. You know, boards that are worth their salt, right, should govern themselves in an orderly manner. Any entity that comes together that organizes themselves to address any type of issue should govern themselves in an orderly manner. And the ZBA and Planning Board, of course, are no exception. One great way to do that is by establishing rules of procedure and then following them. Uh-oh. I just lost the PowerPoint. Are we having some technical issues here? Yeah.
Sorry, for some reason, like my computer is like not in the mood today, and I'm not sure why. Okay.
There we go.
Now, do you have control of it?
It says that I can.
You do. You do.
Okay.
Now. Okay, good.
Okay.
Sorry about that, guys. I don't know
No
why we're having
worries.
so many issues today.
Welcome to 2021, right?
Right.
Okay. So in general, your rules of procedure should lay out duties. Those are basically the powers that you have. You know, this is what it lays out what you can review and what you can decide on as a board or give advice on as a board. So it lays out your duties. It also lays out when and how agendas are set and when meetings are called, right? So the order of business, like, you know, what type of applications come first and how, you know, how you'll decide to lay out your agenda for each meeting and whose responsibility it is to help with that process. Another detail it'll include is an outline. It'll outline acceptable conduct by all attendees at both hearings and meetings. It'll say, okay, you know, this is the etiquette that we expect to be adhered to at these meetings. And I know I used to, actually both the boards at my last employer when I was a municipal planner, you know, they read out loud a set of procedures at the beginning of every meeting so that everyone was on the same page about what the expectations were as far as conduct was at that meeting. And that was something that was also included in their rules of procedure. It'll also lay out the timeline to both draft and finalize minutes and it'll lay out what the content of those meeting minutes should be. So that's another aspect. It also includes who signs off on official documents, depending on your system of organization, you know, depending on your municipality and whether your municipality has a planning staff or a planning department or not. The person who signs off on official documents may be the board chair, or it may be the director or some other person in leadership if there's an actual staff. But again, no matter who it is, that should be detailed, that responsibility and whose it is should be laid out in your rules of procedure. And it'll also lay out under what circumstances and where applications are referred for additional review. So for instance, if it'll lay out when an application needs to be reviewed by the county, for instance, or if it's within a certain distance from an adjoining or adjacent municipality, that it has to be sent over to that municipality for their, not sent over rather, but they need to be notified that that application is up for review by your board. It'll lay out details like that. Also, the rules of procedure will set clear standards for how business should be conducted in general, and that's good for both seasoned and new members alike. You really want to avoid those situations where board members are mimicking each other. Like, you know, if you join a board and, you know, you're green, you're brand new, and there's a lot of people on the board that are more seasoned, you may have someone that tells you, oh, just follow me, do what I do. Well, you may be also picking up on their bad habits, right? And so it's best that both seasoned and new members alike are provided with a clear outline of or a clear set of standards for how they should conduct themselves and how meetings should progress, how meetings should be conducted, how applications should be reviewed, etc. You want to avoid having board members mimic each other Everyone should know and understand their duties. That way, if somebody is doing something that's a little off or makes a mistake, that can be very quickly and easily corrected, and you don't kind of have a domino of all the like multiple mistakes because everyone's following this one person who doesn't know what they're doing anymore, right? And it's just, you know, human nature. We forget things, we get things kind of mixed up sometimes, and so if you have rules of procedure that lay out what those how business should be conducted, it's a way of helping everyone to kind of keep sharp. Now, if you don't have rules of procedure at your board, there's nothing to be ashamed of. However, it is something that you should have. And if you're inspired to create some, or if you just feel guilty because we're talking about it, you're welcome to email us and ask us for a sample so that you don't have to recreate the wheel. So feel free to do that. Our email address will be at the end of the presentation. You're more than welcome to request that from us. And moving forward. Okay, I'm having a little, there we go. Okay, being ethical should really go without saying. You have power, right? Not every board thinks of themselves as having power, but you truly do have power because you're making decisions about what can happen in your community, on the land in your own community. So you have power, but you also have a responsibility to handle business in a professional and ethical manner. Remember, this is not just you representing yourself, you're also representing your municipality. And I mean, it kind of follows that, your reputation is that board's reputation, or that board's reputation is also your reputation. They become kind of one and the same because you're acting on behalf of your municipality. So your job isn't just to make decisions, but also promote confidence and trust when conducting public business. Again, your behavior makes a difference in how the whole process is perceived by the public and by applicants that are going before your board. Again, your reputation becomes the board's reputation. The board's reputation becomes your reputation, right? And you want people to feel like they're always going to get a fair deal when they come before your board with an application. Being ethical is a very broad concept, but basically it just means avoiding conflicts of interest, right? You want to, and when I say conflicts of interest, I'm talking about, financial conflicts of interest, contractual conflicts of interest, and then those that we always think of, like familial conflicts of interest, like with nepotism. You don't want to be perceived as giving someone a break because they're related to you, or, you grew up together, or whatever. So how do you avoid doing that? You avoid doing that, having a conflict of interest, by disclosing, you avoid the perception of having a conflict of interest or being perceived as being unethical by disclosing any actual, apparent, or even potential conflicts of interest that relates to an application or a violation that it's in your authority to review and make a decision on. You want to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest, right? And you do that by, you could recuse yourself, and you would certainly have to disclose it. You'd have to say, look, I think this may be a conflict of interest because I have this relationship with the applicant. Maybe my firm that I work for has done business with them and I've had to interact with this person on a professional level in other areas. The board can discuss it and you can determine whether it's a conflict of interest, but you still want to put it out there, have it noted for the record, and if deemed necessary, recuse yourself from making a vote or motion on that application that's before your board. Similarly, you also want to avoid engaging in ex parte communication. You don't want to be talking to an applicant privately, meaning away from the public's eye, about their request, even if it's a very sincere and well-intentioned question. They just want a little bit of, an idea of how things might proceed. If you have staff, refer them to the planning staff. They can get more information that way, but you just want to avoid any appearance of being unethical or somehow being aligned with an applicant per se, or acting in bad faith. Another example actually of acting in bad faith would be creating any kind of unnecessary or unreasonable delays before you decide on an application. Like, for instance, if you request multiple minor changes, one at a time, like let's say you you ask them to change, the applicant to change one thing, and then they've done that, they've come back before you a month later, and then you want them to change something else. That could be obviously frustrating for the applicant, but again, that also can give the perception that you're trying to delay, and you're using your power in a negative way, right? So one way to do that instead would be to look at the application, make a list of all the changes that are necessary, both minor and major, then have the applicant work on those and then bring them back forward to you at the next meeting. But again, you want to avoid acting in bad faith or even the appearance of acting in bad faith. And so you want to do that. You want to try to act in such a way that it looks like everything that you're doing is above board with the applicant, and then how you interact with them and how you interact with their actual application. Every municipality has a code of ethics that addresses conflict of interest. I'm sure all of you, your municipalities do. You'll definitely want to become familiar with it. Okay. So how do you know whether something is a conflict of interest? Well, again, this also goes back to just the appearance of it. You want to ask yourself whether it could appear to be a conflict. Would somebody who doesn't know that much about the work that you do as a board member see you pass by you doing whatever this is, either talking with an applicant or knowing that this person is related to you or has some other relationship to you on as a person on this board? Could they look at that situation and say, that doesn't smell too good. I don't know about that one. I don't know if they should be able to make a decision on that application because it appears like there's something going on there and it would be unfair, or this person would have an unfair advantage. You always want to err on the side of caution and disclose it to the board, like I mentioned earlier. The board may find that there's no conflict at all as they discuss it among themselves at the meeting. But again, it's still something that you want to put out there. That could be, like I said, potential conflicts, business ties, personal connections, any litigation that you might be involved in that also the applicant is involved in, or that particular property may be involved in. You can then recuse yourself, right? That's where you abstain from voting on the matter and forwarding a motion on the matter. And hopefully your board will still be able to move forward on the application because you'll have alternates, or you'll still have a majority or a quorum to be able to make a vote on that application or any application. If nothing else, if the application is challenged because because there was a perceived conflict of interest, let's say the application gets approved and you have, in this particular application, you've disclosed to the board that you may have a conflict of interest, and they say, oh, no, we don't think it's a conflict of interest after they've discussed it. Well, let's say the application gets approved and then someone from the public, a third party, wants to have it overturned and they pursue litigation. And they say, no, there was a conflict of interest. That's the basis. That's part of the basis of their litigation. Then the record would show that, no, this person said that they disclosed that there was a potential conflict of interest. It was discussed in detail by the board, and they made a determination at that time as a group that it was not a conflict of interest. And so it just shows that, you've done your due diligence, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that the litigation wouldn't go away or be invalidated, but it's more likely that to support your efforts to be transparent and above board in all your dealings. You also want to avoid soliciting or receiving gifts that's either directly or indirectly. I had a colleague several years ago who used to refuse door prizes or giveaways at municipal functions. Like if there was a grand opening for a new facility or office or something and there were some giveaways or door prizes, she would adamantly refuse them and, no, thank you. And I remember one time we had an event where we had a partnership with a private entity. It was a credit union, and they had a grand opening, and not the credit union, but this facility did, and she didn't want any doorways. She won something like in a raffle or something, and she didn't want that either. And that could be an extreme example, but thing to remember about this is that she was adamant about her professional reputation, right? And so should you. You should be adamant about your professional reputation because, again, your reputation is the board's reputation. In general, you want to avoid gifts above $75 or more. And really, my approach is to just avoid anything beyond like something very, very, very minor, like a pen or a magnet or a notepad, something that you would get at like a conference or something, a little tote bag or something. Anything above that or beyond that, it's better to just politely decline. And now Paula will talk about the comprehensive plan.
So the comprehensive plan is we like to say, the heart and soul of all municipal land use matters. It's the expression of a municipality's goals and a roadmap of how to achieve those goals. It essentially says where we are, where we want to be, and how we're going to get there. And a comprehensive plan doesn't need to be a bound volume. It can be a collection of all your land use guidelines and regulations taken in total. If you're challenged, the courts will look at that as a plan for orderly growth. But if you do have a bound volume, your plan can be as small as like 6 pages pamphlet that's really user friendly, or a lot of communities can have comprehensive plans that are size of an old telephone book, but we also like to say size is not necessarily an indicator of quality. It's the planning board's role to make recommendations about the comprehensive plan, but only the governing board can formally adopt a comprehensive plan because they have the legislative powers to do so. And again, it serves as the basis of all land use decisions, and that's in bold on this slide because it's extremely important. No matter what application that comes before you on the planning board or zoning board, you should be taking out your comp plan, looking at the goals, and seeing if that project is in harmony with the goals of that plan. And just briefly, some of the elements of a comp plan for reference. You may have more things going on in your own plan, you may have less, but this is a basic framework to get you going. Some really hot topics right now, just as a quick sidebar, is things like housing. Are you experiencing a lot of growth, or prices increasing or decreasing? Your open space, is it changing? Are you losing some open space? Energy is a big one. The state has very ambitious green energy targets. Are you experiencing a lot of solar or wind growth? Are your regulations up to date to handle that? And transportation and walkability, as we all know, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, so it has more people working from home than ever before. So it means we have less people in cars and more people looking to get out and walk or bike more, especially if they have families and children at home as well. And we always say the most important thing is to know your comprehensive plan. One of the best tips of the afternoon is right here on the right, which is to have a copy available at your meetings for quick reference. Plans should not collect dust on the shelf. You should know where they are, and it should be well worn from use because you're referring to it so frequently. Like, why spend the money, putting it together and the time putting it together if you're not going to ever use it. So make sure that new board members are given a copy when they begin their service on the planning board or zoning board. They should familiarize themselves with it to prepare themselves to make land use decisions when they jump in. Are your applications, again, in harmony with the goals of your plan? You may have an application that comes before you and it's professionally done, so it looks great and everybody's saying, yeah, let's totally do this. But then you take out your comprehensive plan and see, wow, this application for a residential subdivision for senior housing is really needed in our community. This will be a great asset for our community, so let's approve it. But then you look at the site plan and you see, it doesn't have any sidewalks or connectivity to link it to the next housing development or to your downtown, or even a bus stop, for people who probably might not be looking to drive as much, So if you see that and your plan says, we really value walkability in our community, you would really want to turn around and then talk to the developer and ask them to, install sidewalks. And you just point to your plan and say, we value walkability here. Remember, your plan is a sword. It can either be used defensively or offensively. And if you get, heat from the public or from your governing board, you can always point to the plan and say, here's where we're basing our decisions from. So it's always really important to know your comprehensive plan. And then, of course, we want to care for our comprehensive plans as well. Your comprehensive plan should have short, medium, and long-term goals, sometimes referred to as a matrix. So you can look to this for guidance on knowing when it's time to update your plan. Every comprehensive plan should have periodic review built into it, whether it's every year or maybe every 2 years, and you want to go back and revise and update your plans every 5 to 10 years. But again, if you're looking at, the matrix, you should be asking yourself on a regular basis, did we achieve our short-term goals? Why or why not? Did we have some kind of environmental or economic challenge that prohibit us from achieving those goals? Do we have a change in administration? Some administrations are more pro-planning than others, or maybe there's a controversial land use in your community that your supervisor or town board doesn't want to tackle. So again, go back to those. Do we achieve? Do we not achieve our goals? Do we need to change our approach to achieve those goals? Did something out of left field happen, like a global pandemic? And you have to go back and change it again. And you implement your plan with zoning and regulation changes, but you do that after you adopt the plan, because obviously you want those land use tools to drive the goals of your plan. And always, we say, be an advocate for your plan. Don't be ashamed of it if it's a great plan. In meetings, you can hold it up and say, this is what the community has already decided by consensus, and this is what's important to us. Because really, it's supposed to reflect the public's input. And again, adjust the plan as necessary and revise it every 5 to 10 years. And remember, you don't have to do a complete plan overhaul at one time. If you're seeing there's an issue in one part and you as a board, as a planning board, wants to get together and, work on a certain issue, you can tackle it, chapter by chapter, topic by topic. If you're experiencing a lot of demographic change or maybe economic change, or maybe do a housing study, and boards that don't necessarily meet monthly because there's maybe a lot going on in your community, could always attend to working on the comp plan instead. There's always, as we like to say, something for planning boards to do just in their role of being advisory. And of course, now we have to talk about zoning, and the goal of zoning is to avoid incompatible uses. Zoning, again, is that police power. You're protecting the public health, safety, and general welfare. Zoning can also be used to promote aesthetics in your community. Zoning divides the community up into districts. You can have as little as 2 districts if you're maybe a rural community, or hundreds of districts if you are a larger city. But each district will have regulations on the land uses allowed, what you can do, what you can't do, the density or how much of the parcel can be developed, how many stories buildings and structures can have, and finally the placement of structures on the site with setbacks. Zoning, of course, is optional. I'm not sure if everybody on today is necessarily from a community that has zoning. Not all municipalities in New York State have it. But if you are a community that doesn't have zoning, we just like to put out a word of caution. Anytime you're regulating using setbacks or dimensions, it's zoning. So if you're a municipality that uses tools like subdivision review to kind of get around zoning, but you're controlling setbacks and dimensions, you could be engaging in what we call backdoor zoning. You just need to make sure that there's some kind of board to grant relief from those restrictions, or you could find yourself in some trouble later down the road. Again, zoning is adopted by the governing board using their legislative powers, and update your zoning after you adopt your comprehensive plan. And of course, here on this slide, you also see a map, and maps are important because it makes it clear for people in your community to understand where it is. But remember, if you're ever challenged in court, zoning text will trump all images in your zoning regulations, so always make sure that you're clear in both. And make sure that you know where your zoning map is, or where it is, because a lot of times, sometimes we'll hear from municipalities that don't really know where it is. And that must be pretty difficult for a zoning enforcement officer to figure out where exactly, things lie. And for caring for our zoning regulations, we have symptoms of sick zoning regulations include many interpretations or variances being sought or granted, outdated terms or language. So things like, movie rental places are places, sorry, my dog is barking in the background and it's driving me a little crazy. Hold on one sec. Michael. Okay, hopefully.
Welcome to pandemic life, everyone.
Gosh, right? Working from home is like insane sometimes. Anyways, so symptoms could be of a sick zoning regulation is too many interpretations or too many variances being sought or granted. That means that people don't understand what is in your law, what it means, the terminology may be unclear. Then there are things like outdated terms and language. So like I was saying, video rental places don't really exist anymore. Blockbuster's kind of dead. So, you might have language about that in your zoning that isn't really relevant in today's terms. Or Ebony likes to always use the example from her previous job where they used the term car laundry for car wash.
It was automobile laundry. Yeah.
Automobile laundry. So these are things that aren't really something you would hear, regular terminology in 2021. And sometimes our zoning codes can be that way. And of course, new technologies are available. So again, looking 5 to 10 years ago, things like 5G rollout for telecommunications, that wasn't something that we saw. We didn't see these, small cells, or solar wasn't as big of a deal, or wind energy as well. So again, when there's new technology, you want to kind of try to update your regulations as well. And of course, if there's ever confusion on definitions or wording, you want to make sure that your zoning code doesn't have things like or similar uses, because that opens the door and leaves the door open to tons of interpretation. So you'll keep your, zoning board busy all the time if you kind of leave the door open to that. A good zoning code will have some variation of the phrase, all uses not listed are prohibited. So it's cut and dry on what's allowed and what's not allowed. And finally, just like your comp plan, our zoning regulations need to be periodically reviewed to make sure that they're still achieving the goals of the comprehensive plan. And now I think I turn it back over to Ebony to talk about maps.
Yep.
Oh, Ebony, map and maps.
Oh, please don't. Please don't. I was once at a meeting, at a planning board meeting, and an attorney came up to who I had been dealing with for years on different projects, and had come up to address the board and looked at me and said, "Hey, your last name is Mapp." And I just looked at him like, "Are you really?"
Don't even
We're
start.
doing this now? Please stop. Please stop. Anyway, okay. So the review of any application that you're going to get at your board, whether you're a ZBA member or a planning board member, any application usually requires an ability to read or understand maps. There are very few exceptions to this. One exception that I can think of is, I just lost my train of thought. Like a zoning interpretation application, you're not going to need to look at a map for that. But for site plans and even zoning requests, you're going to need to have some familiarity with maps and be able to read them. Even if it's just a vicinity map to kind of help you get your bearings, you're gonna need to be able to understand how maps work, what the directional signs mean and where they, and how, what that means in terms of how you review the application and all of that. We all know what a map is, but there are many kinds and they serve different purposes. And you will encounter a variety of them in your service. So if you're a new board member, you may see some maps today that you're unfamiliar with. If you are a seasoned board member, you will, you'll see ones that you're familiar with. But even with that, there are many types of maps beyond that that we won't cover, but we'll talk about a few of the basic examples. Okay, so the first is a planimetric map. This is pretty basic. It's like a Google map, and in fact, this one is an actual Google map. They're also called vicinity maps. Basically, what they're doing is it just shows you it lets you know where the site is located within your community from a bird's eye view, right? It gives you kind of a context for what you're going to be considering in the application. Usually it shows street names and roads, highways, and it may include building footprints as well. And this type of map, a vicinity map or a planimetric map, it should be part of every application, except for like I said earlier, like a zoning interpretation where a map is not needed. But for any application where you're going to review an actual parcel of land for any purpose, whether it be a special use permit, a variance, a site plan, whatever, every single one of those kinds of applications should include a basic vicinity or planimetric map. You want to be able to get your bearings to know where this site is in the context of your whole community, and that's what these maps do a good job of. Next, we'll talk about topographic maps. Basically, they show the topography or the terrain of a site, the lay of the land, so to speak. They use contour lines to describe the steepness of the terrain, like it'll show a hill, or it'll use contour lines to show the depth of depressions, like downward slopes or valleys, ditches, things like that. It's a way to show the land as a three-dimensional image on a flat sheet of paper. Like it's hard to draw a hill on a flat sheet of paper, and so by drawing the lines that show these the slope or a depression, it better helps you to be able to visualize what that actually looks like on the property just by looking at the piece of paper. Basically, the contour lines are spaced out by a certain number of feet. Those are called an interval. So they're spaced out by a certain interval to measure steepness or depth on the site. And of course, different topographic maps will differ in the spacing or the intervals that they use. It may depend on what that map is trying to show. Like for instance, this map only shows topography, but often topography is added, like these types of contour lines are added to a variety of other plans, like site plans, grading plans. In the instance of a site plan, you'll see topography added to show flood hazard access, right? On a site plan and on like a stormwater plan. It'll be used to show now I can't get my words together, hydrologic features or water bodies on the property, or existing features like wetlands and things like that, or proposed changes to the elevation, right? So you may see the topography of a site kind of measured in different increments depending on the different types of maps that you'll be looking at or plans that you'll be looking at. But again, it just depends on what that map is trying to show. In this particular case, this map that we have on site is just showing the topography alone. It's not showing any buildings or it's not intending to show flood hazard access or things like that. And in general, the closer the lines, the steeper the slope. Another kind of map is a municipal zoning map. This is the map that shows the various zoning districts across your community, and everyone on your board, whether it be zoning board of appeals or planning board, should be extremely familiar with this. This map is your bread and butter, right? And so you want to be very familiar with the different zoning districts and where they are located in your community. The zoning map outlines the specific boundaries, so it shows exactly where those districts cut off and where new districts start. The most common zones that you'll find, or the most common districts that you'll find on a zoning map, include residential, commercial, and industrial, but could include a whole host of others, including open space districts, entertainment districts, overlay districts, and so on and so forth. Usually the map is color coded. Again, it just helps in being able to identify and distinguish what the zoning districts are and where they begin and end, and what they're next to. And it just makes it easier to identify districts at a glance. Next, we have site plan maps. Now, basically a site plan map is a rendering, drawing, or sketch that shows the arrangement, layout, and design of the proposed use of a single parcel of land as shown on the plan. It basically shows everything that's happening on the site: building placement, parking design, fencing. It may even show lighting and landscaping. It basically shows that single parcel, what's happening on it, its boundaries, right, and the adjacent streets. And truth be told, I mean, you should see a lot of these over your service, even if you're on the ZBA, even if you're not even approving a site plan application, because you have to be able to see what's happening on the parcel, right? So even if you're looking at a variance application, you should still be looking at a site plan, right, to be able to make that judgment. And, you know, site plans are, and because of that fact, because you need to be able to see what's going on the parcel itself to make a decision, site plans are often used or needed to review other requests. Again, that includes variances, special use permits, etc., because they're showing what is planned or what changes are planned for the site. Another example are subdivision plats. Now, that's the division of any parcel of land into a number of lots, blocks, or sites as specified by your local zoning or zoning laws or ordinances. And it's intended to comply with the regulations, whether it has streets or not, and show highways or whatever for the purpose of sale. And it's, it's laid out for the purposes of sale, transfer, or ownership or development, transfer of ownership or development. So the subdivision plat is sought to, the subdivision plat is submitted to the planning board for approval because there's either it's going to be sold, or it is about to be sold, or it was just sold, the ownership was just transferred, or there are some plans for future development for the site. That's why you'll get a subdivision plat. Basically, the subdivision plat shows a large area divided into multiple parcels of land that are labeled, and they're labeled as lots, and that's what we commonly refer to them in conversation all the time. You know, lots. That's what we're talking about. These little sections of land that are kind of sectioned off from other parcels of land. Planning boards, remember, are delegated this responsibility by New York State statute, not from the governing board. So it's just the purview of the planning board to review subdivision plats. The ZBA does not weigh in on this. However, in the review of an application by the ZBA, maybe for a variance request, they may look at subdivision plats, but they are not going to approve the subdivision itself. They may review an aspect of it, like I said, like a setback requirement, but they're not going to make a decision on a full plat or a full parcel on their own, or that's not their job. Subdivision plats always include detailed measurements of the lot or parcel that define its shape, and usually it's laid out in words, and it's called a legal description, and that's what defines the boundary. It may or may not show proposed streets, but again, it should show lot lines, existing adjacent streets, where utility lines will be placed, and any kind of specifics regarding their type. You know, that's true whether we're talking about water or sewer. And if streets are shown, it'll include the shape of the streets and the dimensions. It won't just be like a long black line going through or past the parcel. It'll include the actual shape and dimension of that street or the intended street, if it doesn't currently exist. It's important to note that there's a huge goal in reviewing subdivision plats, and that is to avoid creating lots that are unsuitable for development. You may have someone that comes before you that is anxious to subdivide their property. Maybe they've had it for a long time and they haven't been able to do anything with it, and now they have an opportunity, somebody wants to buy it from them, but what they have created in trying to divide that lot is a lot that makes it difficult to build on because it doesn't meet the requirements, the other requirements of your code. So, you know, you may have a residential subdivision, someone wants to break that up and subdivide part of it, but the lot that they've created doesn't meet the regulations for having a single family home or a multifamily home or whatever is allowed, whatever uses or activities that are allowed in your zoning, in that zoning district, it may not allow it because it doesn't meet the dimensional standards for that district. So that's something to keep in mind. You know, you want to avoid creating or approving lots that make development impossible, right, on that particular piece of property. You also want to avoid approving plats that make it inaccessible, right? For instance, like, you know, that makes it difficult for emergency vehicles to access it. You know, that's one big bone that I pick with, that I have to pick with flag lots. Those lots that are shaped with a P. It's a long driveway, but they don't have a whole lot of street frontage. It can be difficult for emergency vehicles to get in and out of those places, and it makes it difficult. It's like, it's a boon for the property owner in the short run, but in the long term, it can be kind of a headache. And moving on, here's another map. This is a great resource. It's developed by the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Seeker EAF Mapper. It's a great tool that's meant to make incorporating Seeker into your application review process a whole lot easier. Remember, Seeker is just an information gathering tool. It is not an actual decision that you've made, but it's just a way to amass information about the property. And the mapper is just another tool to help you do that. It's a clearinghouse of information. I like to think of it as that, a clearinghouse of information. It helps you to collect all of the data that you need to do a thorough review as to, you know, how this property is going to impact, how this development may impact the environment. You just go to the website, punch in the address, and the mapper helps the applicant answer part 1 on either the long or the short EAF. And that saves time and money because the information is all in one place as opposed to searching through various resources and all of that, or hiring someone, the applicant, hiring someone to, you know, provide all this information for them. And then also it's more accurate, right? They know that they're using the most up-to-date information by going to this specific mapper. And it'll give them a variety of information, whether it be about any endangered species in that area, any unique archaeological facts about that site that need to be kept in mind. Maybe there's an archaeological site that's nearby or on that property that they need to be mindful of. So again, it's just a great resource. It may take a little while to use. I've heard it, you know, and I've even had the experience of going on, and it may take a little while for the mapper to kind of produce that report that you need, but just be patient with it. It may take a little while to process, but it will create the report. So don't give up when you make that attempt. Don't do that. And as far as a few other mapping resources, GIS Clearinghouse, that allows you to download data if you have GIS. And the Office of Planning and Development's GIS Gateway, that offers water-specific data sets, like about waterways or like inland or coastal waterways. And it's really a valuable resource for communities that are waterfront communities. And it's useful for them too when they're submitting applications that require a consistency review from the Department of State or the Army Corps of Engineers. So that's a great resource as well. And I'll hand it over to Paula, who will talk about preparing for meetings.
Awesome. So let's just look at some practical and legal tips for preparing for your meetings. And we'll start with the most important one, which is quorum, and that is the number of members legally needed to conduct any public business. So that's convening meetings, it's having public hearings, that's voting. You want to do that in an open public forum with the proper quorum. So of course that is just the at least a majority of a fully constituted board, and a fully constituted board includes any absences. That means people who can't show up for the night for whatever reason, if they're sick or if they're out of town, and any vacancies. So that means if a seat hasn't been filled in the first place, you have to count all the empty seats when achieving your quorum. And if you cannot achieve quorum, then obviously you can't conduct the public's business and the meeting will be forced, you'll be forced to cancel your meeting. And this is where alternates can come in, and it can be very helpful as long as you have a local law that allows for the use of alternates in case of absences. The state statute allows for alternates to be used in cases of conflict of interest. If you want to use them for absences, you just have to do it again. Have your municipal local governing board do it by local law. And that's always really important because, you know, people are paying to, you know, come before your board. You want to make sure that, you know, you're as professional as possible and so that you're not wasting anybody's time. And before the meeting, you want to, you know, be well prepared before a meeting, essentially make sure that the meeting goes smoothly and goes probably faster than if everybody shows up not knowing what is going to be on the agenda that night. So comply with all open meetings law noticing requirements. And for open meetings law, there's two main components, and that is notice and access. So you're providing notice to the public and the media about when the meeting is, and access to the public because essentially the public should be able to watch and listen to the work of their government. And that includes agenda setting sessions or workshops if you have those as well. And your chair should be shepherding your meeting. Typically for most communities, they prepare an agenda. Hopefully this task is defined in your rules of procedure. And then they decide the order of applications. Do old applications go first and then new ones, or is it, you know, simple applications followed by complex applications? Or if you have something that's controversial, you may put it at the front of the meeting so that if the media is there, they can cover it and then they can leave and go deal with other things that are going on. Or you may slip, you know, a minor, you know, fence, you know, area variance. You might put that ahead because you don't want the person to have to sit there all night, especially if you're going to have a really long, drawn out, you know, public hearing. And of course, you want to schedule the appropriate venue. If you have something, if you have an application before you that's very controversial, you probably want to move the meeting to a place that can handle the increased number of people who are coming out. So, you know, if you normally do it in a small room, you might move it to, you know, an auditorium or maybe a gym. Especially nowadays with the pandemic, you know, we all need 6 feet of distancing. So, you know, usually larger venues are better at this point. You want to make sure that any technology that you're using is up and running when needed. I wish we did that with Zoom this afternoon for me, because my computer is not a huge fan of Zoom today, but it's funny, WebEx it loves, so you never know what's going to happen. So it's always good to practice before you get going so that you try to avoid as many hiccups as possible. And post your meeting materials, including applications, maps, and anything else prior to the meeting so that the public can review proposals before the board. That's actually regulation as well. If you have high-speed internet and a municipal website that is regularly updated, you are asked to post any of those materials on beforehand. And sometimes I remember I talked to a person recently who was saying, like, we were asked to come as neighbors. We got notice that there was some kind of application before them for a neighboring property, but they didn't post any of the application materials or whatnot. So they went to the meeting, and because they didn't know what the subject, you know, application, what it was about, they couldn't offer public comment. And apparently the board was pretty rude to them in the fact that they didn't know what was going on. Again, you want to be as transparent as possible. So if there's something, you know, particularly controversial before you, you want to make sure that that stuff is up. I know that technology can be difficult, but try to do the best you can. And how to support the review process. And this is where you understand what happens from the you know, viewpoint of an applicant. You should know, you know, the first person an applicant's going to go to when they come in to submit an application. Are they going to go to a municipal planner or your zoning enforcement officer? Or do you have a clerk in your office or a secretary that's going to help them? And again, you want to make sure that you have like a shared permit tracking system, because sometimes permits will require different departments to review or sign off on. So you might be going before, a zoning board for, variance. You're going before the planning board because there's a subdivision, and also, it has to go to your municipal engineer to make sure that the utility plan is up to snuff. So you want to make sure that you're well organized on your side. So having some kind of system to understand where an application is always at is always helpful. You also want to, of course, understand each board's role and responsibility. So again, in that example, you're going to have the zoning board's going to take a look and decide on a variance application. You're going to have the town engineer taking a look. You might also have the county stepping in and also doing their own review. Again, we're huge fans of checklists. So that's a good opportunity for you to help there. And in today's day, we're all doing more with less. So sometimes you have to have some staff sharing, but that can actually be really helpful because they might know, of a lot of different things that are happening in your community. And know what you're working with. So you want to be familiar, obviously, with your municipal land use application. So read the application so you know what, you're expecting applicants to come before you. So for zoning boards, it's interpretation of variances. For planning boards, it's subdivision, site plan, and sometimes special use permits. Include the secret EAF form in your application materials, even though you can use the EAF mapper. At least put things out there so that, and trying to explain to people that a lot of actions are subject to seeker. You want to make sure that your applications are clear and precise. Do you have a frequently asked question section or guide for new applicants? A lot of times, people might be coming for something very, minor, like a fence, variance application. And, these are lay people. And, they can be really intimidated by the process of coming through, especially with zoning, because the statutory tests are so strict. So, it could be helpful to have a frequently asked question section, or at least a guide as to what's going to happen. In fact, I think there is a guide for applicants in part of the in the handouts that we sent that are on the Southern Tier West website. So take a look at those if you need. If that sounds like something you want to do, of course, reach out to us. We'd be happy to provide other samples. And again, like we said, we love checklists. So keep checklists, keep track of submissions. There's a checklist for applicants so they know what they need to bring to you, how many copies, what's going to be expected of them. But the checklists are really helpful for municipal staff and board members as well, because it keeps you on top of things as well. And especially if something does have to go to the county for review, you can put it right on the checklist, incorporate those timelines, especially for planning boards with subdivision reviews, because you don't want to end up with a default approval. So again, just keeping tabs of what exactly is going on and what's expected of people that come before your board. And reviewing application materials. Board members cannot reach a fair and impartial decision without a firm understanding of the matters before them. So you shouldn't be looking at any application from a personal opinion. Yes, you use your personal information and your knowledge to help you make an informed decision, but you need to make sure that there's a distinction between your personal opinion and the facts on the application before you. And as a board member, there are some positive fact-finding steps that you can take to make sure that you're making the best possible decision, not based on perception, but based on the facts before you. And in order to prepare for the meeting, you need to make sure that you have all relevant information needed to make a decision. So you'll need, obviously, at a minimum, copies of the application, site plan materials, and other things to look at, so it allows you to read them over and prepare before the meeting. And typically we say, It's best to make sure that board members have their stuff at least a week before the meeting. You may be a person that does site plan or a site visit before the meeting, so you get a feel of what the land is, which Ebony will talk about here, I think, in the next slide. You know, prepare a list of questions or concerns about each one of the applications, and again, get out there and visit the property to kind of get a feel of what is being asked before you. And the agenda setting meeting or workshop, these are subject to open meetings law if you're meeting together as a quorum. Sometimes you'll see those happen at, like, if the meeting's at 7 p.m., there might be an agenda workshop at 6:30. Make sure if you're moving together to decide on like the order of applications that are coming before you or whatnot, make sure that you're noticing that to the meeting, to the public as well. You don't want to do this stuff behind closed doors. And the point of these meetings, again, aren't to discuss the merits of the application. Really, you're just taking a quick look to make sure that you have everything you need to review the application at the official meeting. This is also important for things like telecommunications applications that come before you for like 5G, because there's federal shot clocks at play. So you want to make sure that, you know, an application is fully complete before it comes before you, because if you realize, oh, we don't have, you know, we don't have maps or enough copies or whatnot, you know, you just want to make sure that like you're going to have to probably stall it and put it on the next agenda for the next month, you know, and that can be irritating for all parties involved. And of course, this also allows you to determine if there's going to be a conflict of interest for any of the applications that are coming before you, and if you're going to need alternates. So again, these can be super helpful as well. And working with planning and enforcement staff, you know, this always depends on who is working in your communities and how, you know, how much staff you have in your community. But a lot of times, you know, your planning or enforcement staff might be your first line of defense who are reviewing applications and coordinating the land use review. They often understand land use plans and regulations in your communities. They're often professionals, so they can be quite helpful to you. They may assist in updating your regulations, advising your land use boards. They also may be meeting with developers or residents or property owners. And they can really be the voice of planning and land use in your, you know, city or village or town hall. They often maintain your office records. So, you know, if you have to go back and there's a question about, you know, a variance that you gave, you know, 5 years ago, maybe they would have that information for you. Planning staff usually applies for funding. That's a big job and big role of planners, is to get money for the municipality. And of course, they can be helpful when it comes to educating the community about issues, especially controversial issues, before the board. And now Ebony is going to talk about doing some site visits.
Yes. So conducting site visits. The purpose, just like this slide states, is to observe an application site, right? It's just like the vicinity map. It's a good way to get your bearings and see how a site works or does not work in real life. The added benefit of being able to go is that you can, you know, get a sense of things that you could never get just by looking at a piece of paper or like a map. You know, you can get the lay of the land. You can walk it and see what, see how it appears now, and how that, and imagine how it would be impacted. Both that and the adjacent properties would be impacted by whatever new development is proposed. The purpose there is just to observe. You're not there to make decisions or compare notes with colleagues or even snoop, right? For some board members, there's kind of an added benefit of being on the board, which is that you get to know what's coming before everyone else is, you know, so there is the excitement of knowing that a KFC or a Target or whatever is coming long before anyone else knows. So I guess that's kind of a perk, but the purpose of doing a site visit really is just, again, just to get an idea of how the site functions and how the development might work on the site, and get, you know, an idea of, you know, those other factors that you wouldn't be able to get from reviewing a piece of paper, like the view. Will the view be disrupted by the development that an adjacent property owner has? If they have this beautiful vista that they have now, will that be changed in some way by the addition of this development? Are there any odor, noxious odors, things like that? Are there other things that just you would never be able to get from just looking at a plan? Like I said, you don't want to make decisions when you go there. You're just there to observe, and you want to be mindful of who's there with you. It's best to go individually or in groups of no more than 2 people. You really don't want to, again, remember we talked earlier about avoiding the perception of a conflict of interest or ex parte communication, things like that. You want to be mindful that that you are kind of acting on behalf of your municipality, and you want to, again, give every appearance that everything that you're doing is above board. Now, the reason why I say that is because you want to limit the amount of people that go to the site from the board at the same time, because you want to avoid creating a quorum, right? And Paula talked about that a little bit earlier. You don't want to have you don't want to meet the requirement to have a quorum, which is a majority of your board being present. You don't want to have a majority of your board on the site, because guess what that means? That means you're having a meeting, right? And so if you're having a meeting, that also means that the meeting should have been noticed. The public should have been noticed about when this meeting was going to happen, where, and how they can get there themselves, right? They would have been, there should have been provisions made for them to also attend, right? And so if you're not going to do that, and that's not the goal of site plan visits anyway, right? You want to make sure that you don't achieve a quorum. The best way to do that is to visit a site individually or with no more than 2 people at a time, and zip your lip about what you see. Go ahead and take notes if you like, but do not have a conversation about what's on the site. Keep your comments to yourself. You also want to, if you have them, follow up with any planning staff. If you have a planner on in-house, or if you can talk to a county planner that may also be reviewing the site, because of an application. If you have comments or questions about your observations, go ahead and follow up with staff. That's perfectly legitimate. But you do want to avoid taking comments and questions from passersby or neighbors during the site visit. If someone comes up to you and says, hey, what are you doing over there? And you tell them, oh, I'm a board member. I'm just here to, to do a brief site visit, just to get myself familiar with the property before we make this decision on an application. They may have a bunch of follow-up questions. They may have some juicy tidbits that they'd like to share with you. And your response to that is just direct them to the public meeting or the public hearing on the application. Say, you know what, I can't discuss this, but you're welcome to attend the meeting, which will be an XYZ date at XYZ time at XYZ location. Again, this could be viewed as ex parte communication, which is not cool. So you want to, again, politely decline to engage about the details of the application or the site at all with anyone else. Okay, moving on. Oh, there we go. And to have an organized approach, you want to consider dividing the site visit into at least 2 categories, right? So on one hand, you'll look at the parcel itself. You'll be focused on the terrain, the presence of any natural buffers. Maybe there's a long and a wide row of mature trees along the property line. Take notice of that. You may want to evaluate the proposed development's connection to any existing structures on the property. Maybe there's some structures there that are going to be expanded in some way as part of the proposed development. You also want to take a look at the existing curb cuts, any internal roadways. If again, this is an already developed site, but it will be expanded or changed in some significant way, you may want to take a look at how it currently lays out and how that'll be impacted by the proposed development, and what impacts then that will have on the rest the surrounding uses, because that's the next consideration. After you've looked at what's happening on the parcel itself, you'll look at the adjacent uses, views, and impacts that the proposed development could could create or impact, right? You want to look at what's happening next door. Again, you want to take a look at those vistas. Will this new development create a change in how the next door neighbor is able to view the property that's next to it? Will there be traffic issues? Things like that. Is there are there any protected or sensitive uses next door? By sensitive, it could be an environmental thing like a wetland, or it could be a social thing like a school, right? Or a daycare is something that would be considered a protected use next door to this property. And one quick and dirty tip that's usually helpful with site visits in general is just taking your application with you, the application and the checklist, right? The application checklist. Hopefully you have one, right? And that's a way that you can make sure that you're looking at everything that you'll need to look at in order to evaluate the application and make a decision later at the meeting, right? So if you have the checklist with you, you can look at all the things that are required on that checklist that they should have provided in the application, right? The maps, the information about the topography, information about maybe any grading, things like that. You look at that checklist and it'll help you to stay on track and look at everything that you would normally have to look at to make your decision, okay, while you're on the actual property. And you also want to consider your review elements, the standards that are required, that you're required to review as part of making your decision on that application. So that's just a quick and dirty tip. Just take that checklist with you and also have an idea what your review elements are, the things that you're required to review, and that'll help you to do a thorough a thorough review, right, when you go on your site visit. And usually, and you want to know that in advance anyway. Usually when I would do a site visit, I would have specific things in mind that I wanted to observe on the site, because again, some things you just needed to be able to see, touch, and taste with your own, on your own, as opposed to looking at a map. And so I would already have a list of some of those things that I wanted to take a closer look at on the site. And usually it related to how the site functions in how it functions in relation to the adjacent property. And sometimes it was that I wanted to just verify things that I thought I was sure about, or that I was certain about how they operated, but I wanted to go to the site and just make sure, just double check, do my due diligence, and just verify whether I was correct in my estimation. On-site consideration. So some other questions to consider could be like those here. Is the property wetter or drier than you thought? Could there be a drainage issue? Are there areas of poor or good drainage? Are there any unusual gradients or slopes that need to be accounted for? I once did a project reviewed an application where a facility would be built on, like a community kind of facility would be built on a piece of municipally owned land that prior to this point was considered undevelopable, right? It was right next to a cemetery, and cemeteries make great neighbors, right? But in this particular case, the land also had a huge just a huge drop from the firm property line. Like maybe for the first 2 to 5 feet, it was level, and then it just went sharply down. And so that made it really difficult for development on that parcel. But by going to the site, taking a look at it, and working with the applicant, we saw that how much grading would be needed and how much they would need to elevate the proposed development in order to make it level with the existing grade. So again, these are things that you want to be mindful of and thinking about when you're looking at a piece of property. Is the neighboring building surprisingly close or far away? Will there be, will the siting of the neighbor's property, or the structures on the neighboring property, impact the application property's ability to, or that property owner's ability to enjoy the use of their land, right? Do they have a building that's a little too close to the setback line, and some noise? Maybe if it's a commercial or industrial area, maybe there's some noise associated with that structure that may impact this particular property owner, or vice versa. That's just something that you want to be thinking about. Did you smell or see or hear something unusual? Sometimes you can even taste, how something smells, right? I used to live in Chicago at one point, and there was this chocolate factory that was downtown. And if you walked within 5 blocks of that chocolate factory, you could smell and taste the chocolate. And that was in some ways a welcome distraction, and in other ways not. So like I said, you may want to, go to the site to see what you smell and how that impacts your experience of that site. Do the proposed locations of new structures, roads, and driveways make sense? Again, these are things that you want to take a look at. You don't have to be technically savvy or be an engineer. A lot of this is just kind of common sense, critical thinking stuff, and it's all within your ability as a board member to be able to execute. So site visits, a larger perspective. Here's what you'll think. Here's where you'll think about the site in the context of the surrounding area, like the neighborhood or the community that the site resides within. So the questions that you can ask in that case are, is there common vegetation or trees in the community? Maybe for this particular site, you want the landscaping to match the existing the landscaping on this site to match the existing landscaping in the community, in that neighborhood. If there's a predominant theme in terms of that look or that aesthetic, you may want that to match it. Are there good views? Was the nearest public road intersection easy or hard to get through? That may impact what happens on this property. I had an application once where a site was being repurposed. There used to be like a drive-through, like a gas station and convenience store, and now it was becoming a retail operation without a drive-through, without serving food or gas or anything like that, just straight retail. And so they had, like, I want to say 3 or 4 driveways. That's not necessary for that type of use. And it was also on a busy street. So in being able to go and look at that site, knowing that that particular property was right next to, in a commercial corridor that backed right up to a residential, established residential area. And so there would be a lot of pedestrians moving through that site. And so our reaction to that was to say, okay, in order to make this a safer development for the new use that will be there, let's remove one of these driveways. And that's what happened. And it was, again, because of our ability to kind of go to the site and take a look at it in the context of its surroundings and the other uses that surround that property. So, are there sidewalks? Are they in good condition? Is there a lot of traffic? Are cars parked in odd places? Again, these are other questions that you could ask yourself as you take a look at the property. And we've already talked a little bit about ex parte communication in the ethics section. Remember, it's not necessarily illegal, but of course it can frame perceptions about your integrity. And remember, your integrity is the board's integrity. Your board's reputation is your reputation, and your reputation is the board's reputation. They basically are one and the same in terms of public perception. So you want to be mindful about avoiding ex parte communication. So again, ex parte communication is when a board member is contacted outside of a meeting, outside of the public view, right, concerning a pending issue. You want to avoid those applicants because you want to, again, preserve the perception that you have integrity, right? You also want to let the board know, disclose it on the record when any such contact has taken place. And you want to be mindful to also not discuss applications with outsiders at all, but also don't discuss applications via email with board members or outsiders or applicants, right? You want to try to be as above board and do all that in the public realm as much as possible. If you're talking about procedure, that's a different issue, but in terms of the merits of the application itself and whether it'll get reviewed and approved or denied, that is a totally separate matter, and that should be done only in the public realm, okay? And I think, oh no, I can have another few to go. Let's see. No, I think that's it. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll handle the next.
Sorry about that.
And then, yeah, we're cruising along here. Good thing. So let's talk now about what happened in the meeting. So we've kind of touched on this already, but just a reminder for open meetings law, the definitions of what a public meeting and a public hearing is. A public meeting is the official convening of a public body for the purpose of conducting the public's business. Meetings allow the public to listen and observe, but not to comment. And you want to be careful with public meetings because if you allow one person from the public to comment, you essentially open the door to everyone else. You know, when you're in a public meeting, you should really be focused on getting through the business before you. The minute you kind of open it up to the public to make comment, you can easily get kind of sidetracked pretty quickly. And, you know, you want to get through what you have to get through. Whereas a public meeting or a public hearing is an official proceeding of a governmental body or officer during which the public is accorded the right to be heard. And who is the public? And our colleague always says, anybody with a heartbeat. And public hearings are required for all ZBA matters before you. So Zoning Board of Appeals members should be quite seasoned in how to do a public hearing. And they also are required for some planning board members for subdivision, for special use permits, and for site plan when it's required in your local law. And of course, I keep mentioning a global pandemic, so we might as well touch on open meetings law in the time of COVID-19. We currently are under Executive Order 202.92, which allows for remote public hearings until February 26, 2021. That allows for telephone or Zoom or WebEx meetings, and you don't have to let people know where you are, and you don't have to let the public see you either. So if you don't have a video camera, you don't have to show it. Normally you can do meetings in normal times remotely, but the public needs to be able to see and view and hear you, and also it needs to be open to the public. So if you have people who serve on your board and they, you know, go to Florida for 3 months out of the year, as long as they have a video camera and a high-speed internet connection and you can do it via Zoom, they can participate, but they also have to open up whatever room that they're sitting in open to the public to allow them to view the proceedings as well. So that means, you know, sign and notice and access play in that. But in COVID-19, all of that is obviously thrown out the window because we really want to make sure that people aren't really congregating as much. The best practice is if you have the ability to hold meetings both in person and online. We saw this especially over the summer because, you know, the rates kind of dropped. You know, continue to do both so that people who aren't comfortable attending in person can still participate, especially as we see a bunch of variants flying around. If you can't allow for written comment, that can be read into the record at the next meeting. And of course, you can keep up to date on all executive order extensions through the Committee on Open Government at DOS. That is their website. So it's not as clear about remote public hearings. So there's kind of different thoughts on that. Most people have been doing them online, but we've been told that the executive orders are for public meetings and not for hearings. But my guess is if anybody gets, you know, challenged in this time, most likely the courts are going to give, you know, the benefit of the doubt to municipalities, because obviously we're under some crazy circumstances right now. And another thing, if you're doing remote public meetings, is you want to make sure that you are not only providing meeting minutes, but you need to transcribe your proceedings as well. There's no amount of time in terms of giving those transcriptions up, but if you are doing it via Zoom or WebEx, you need to have a transcription service of the proceedings of your public meeting. So be aware of that. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. I think Ebony just put up some stuff about it. So we do answer lots of questions at this time about that. So always feel free to reach out. And conducting public hearings, you know, another good tip is put the rules of the road on the back of your agenda so everybody knows what to expect. So, you know, everybody's going to get 3 minutes to speak tonight. You don't have to allow people to yield their time to someone else. Sometimes that happens where, you know, people are upset, they hire an attorney, everybody yields their time to that attorney. You don't have to allow for that. Some municipalities do, but you don't have to. So in that regard, put the rules of the road out there so that everybody knows what to expect. You want, as board members, you want to be courteous and careful of your body language. Don't be the member that's, playing on their phone or texting with somebody, or their arms are crossed, or even worse, if you argue with speakers, or maybe even napping. It doesn't set the tone that you're engaged in what the public has to say or interested in the matter before you. And of course, you can ask speakers to identify themselves, but you cannot force people to provide that information. And that's due to privacy. And unfortunately, a victim of domestic violence was once found through meeting minutes. So, you can ask people to identify themselves, but you can't force them to. So just keep that in mind as well. We want to make it safe for everybody. And working with consultants, consultants can be all different sorts of people: planners, engineers, architects, surveyors, attorneys. These professionals are sometimes available to answer questions from the review board. And they usually are there to really help you as you progress through the review process. And remember, if the consultants are working for you, you should really don't be intimidated by them. Establish a lead contact, because the people who come out to pitch their services to you might not be the people that you're regularly working with. So make sure when you are hiring a consultant to ask to meet the people who will actually be assisting you most often. Evaluate their work in intervals. Don't wait until the end of the project to decide you're not happy with what they came up with, or it's not enough, or it's not what you're expecting. And then, of course, notice any of those red flags, like if they're missing deadlines for you, or they're dodging your calls or emails to check in. You want to try to address those issues sooner than later. And another note on consultants is sometimes applicants will bring their consultants with them. That can be kind of intimidating for board members as well, especially if you're kind of a newer member. Try not to be too worried about it. Just know that you're doing the best that you can. Don't be intimidated. Sometimes some applicants do that on purpose to try to get what they want, and kind of make you feel like throw you off a bit. So really try not to get intimidated by that. And also, you can have professional project review services. So if you are having difficulty going through a application that's before you, because none of you are engineers and it has a lot of engineering plans, you can hire your own professional help or your own attorney or engineer if your local regulations allow for it. And that ties back to this Office of the State Comptroller opinion. And then you would essentially use those fees and charge it back to the applicant. So local regulations can specify the pre-established fees. It could be on a municipal budget item. Like if you have a specific planning board budget, you might hire your own attorney because there's a really difficult pilot project coming through for a solar project in your community, and you really need the assistance of an attorney to help you through that process. You would hire your own attorney to help you figure out what it all means. And sometimes you can also do this for staff training as well, especially if you have a really complicated subdivision application before you and you're just not quite sure. Sometimes it's good to just ask a consultant to come in and teach you. You could always reach out to the DOS. We're always happy to help in that regard as well. But you might have your own consultants or your own attorneys to help you. And now Ebony's going to talk about questions.
Yeah, I mean, just like what Paula was saying, don't be afraid to ask for help, whether that be from a professional, like an architect, engineer, if you're hiring someone for their services, or the municipal attorney. But even if it's just basic questions that you have as a lay person, because you're all, in most cases, I mean, and sometimes there are, land use attorneys and engineers and other folks that have that background that may have an understanding of land use because of their chosen profession. But in most cases, that's not the case, right? It's usually just other people from the community who have expertise in other areas, but are compelled because of their uh, volunteer spirit or because of their enjoyment or love of their community to volunteer and be on a planning board or zoning board of appeals. So most folks do not have experience in this, and so that's understood. We get that it comes with the territory. Most of the board members are lay persons, but it's better to ask than make a misinformed decision, especially for decisions that have a long shelf life, which land use decisions tend to do, right? So while you're expected to learn in your service, you're not expected at all to be an expert. So it's okay to ask for legal advice or other assistance, maybe from staff if your municipality does have planning staff, or from the municipal attorney, like I mentioned, the county planners, regional planners, of course, DOS, just like Paula mentioned. We can be a resource. We cannot make decisions for you, but we can certainly give you some advice or alternatives with regard to whatever matter you're facing. We can certainly help you understand some of the technical difficulties, not technical difficulties, the technical details. That's the better way to put it, that come with an application that you may be reviewing. At the end of the day, you may be a layperson, but you are also an expert in your community, and that's why you're on the board in the first place, right? You live there, you live and breathe it, you know how the community works, and so that's why you and your colleagues are on these boards, because you live in that community and you have knowledge about it. So that knowledge plus the application of your zoning laws, zoning code, your comprehensive plan, those things together are what arm you to be able to make good decisions. And of course, relying on your resources like that municipal attorney, Department of State, or your county planner or staff planner. And you want to also be clear and direct with applicants. I can't emphasize that strongly enough. The applicants, like this slide says, they will appreciate it, even if your regulations to hold applicants to a high standard, kind of puts them at a disadvantage in one way or the other. Even if they disagree, they'll know, like, if you're clear and direct with them about, the merits of their application and why it is being approved or denied and what the next steps would be, and why it was approved or denied as it relates to the actual application of your laws, right, of your code, then they'll know, okay, this is what happened. This is what they said was wrong. If I fix that, maybe I'll be able to come back again and, get an approval next time. Even if they disagree, they'll know what they can do to move forward. And that kind of certainty is worth its weight in gold, right? It can be a very frustrating experience for applicants to come before a planning board or a zoning board of appeals, whether they be professionals like architects and engineers, or whether they be your average, Joe who wants to put up a pergola. It can be a frustrating experience, in part because for some people it's a new experience, right? And then for others it's because they may have to make changes, or because they may not understand everything. And so being clear and direct can go a long way in helping everyone to be more comfortable with the process. And when decisions are unclear or their rationale isn't clear, it can be even more frustrating. And so when we're talking about being clear and direct, I mean, that's where, that's when questions about whether the planning board or the zoning board of appeals is encouraging or discouraging development, if they're being business friendly or not business friendly, if they're even being fair. When you have questions like that, get more airtime when the planning board or the ZBA is not being clear and direct in regards to the decisions that they make and why they have been made. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Be clear and direct. working with the media, even if you only have, a few applications every now and again, at some point, every municipality has at least one application that will have a lot of public interest, right? It may be controversial. It may be the first one in a long time. And so people are just kind of like perking up, like, what's this about? It could be for any reason, but every now and then, every municipality gets, like I said, an application that generates some public interest. And for that reason, you may have to interact with the media. Now, if you don't have a media plan in your rules and procedures, you really want to consider developing one. And it should lay out how you'll handle questions and comments from the media. It can include a press release and not a press release, the methods in which you interact with the media should be laid out in that plan. It could be through a phone call, through press releases, through news conferences, and you want to, lay out how those things will proceed and who will initiate those things. You also want to pick a spokesperson to be the official point of contact. In general, that's usually the board chair, and of course, that person should be one that is that has the ability to represent your board and your municipality in the most professional way, right? If you have someone on your board that maybe doesn't have that ability, or gets kind of starstruck in front of an audience or in front of a camera, of course you want to give that person a break and instead put the other person forward that will be best able to communicate whatever the matters are to the public and via the media. And of course, you also want to, this is a good tip, you want to put controversial issues at the very top of your agenda. What that does is it allows you to deal with that issue at the very beginning of your meeting, and that way all of the people that came to that meeting that maybe have a disruptive force in some way or a disruptive energy, once you handle that application, all of those people leave, right? And everyone else who has an application before your agenda will remain. And generally that's typically fewer people, a whole lot less than the people that showed up just because of that one application that generated all that public interest, right? And so if you get that dealt with at the very top of your meeting, you can go on and all those people that showed up to deal with that first meeting, that first agenda item, that controversial item, they're not waiting until the very end of your meeting or some other later point in the meeting to be able to finally be heard. And by then they're fatigued, everyone's a little fatigued. It's best to just kind of get that dealt with at the very top of the meeting, and it tends to make things run smoother after they're gone as well. And really, even if the matter is controversial, I'll say this, most reporters are not experts in municipal land use law. We're talking about working with the media. So, in talking about an application or a regulation and how it's being applied to a particular piece of property, it's also an opportunity to educate them as well. It's been in my experience that it's really a two-way street. You get to disseminate accurate information to the media and clarify the issues at hand, right? And then they get information directly from the horse's mouth, so to speak, right? And they also have a better understanding of the process and the regulations and kind of the rationale for the regulation in the first place, right? And so, again, I look at that as an opportunity. It doesn't have to be an adversarial conversation. It doesn't have to be heated. It can just be, okay, I'm just going to educate you about how the process works and what our code says, and that's as far as you can go, right? But you can't require them to write accurate information, but at least you know that you've kind of helped the case in the sense that you're helping to get accurate information out there. That way, when the meeting is taking place or the decision is rendered, there's a better understanding of the rationale behind it, because hopefully they would have printed the explanation that you gave around why it's being handled the way it is being handled. Okay, making your decision stick. So voting considerations. Remember, we said that a quorum is needed to take a vote. That means that you have to have at least a majority of your board present in order to achieve a quorum, and that is also in order to be able to take a vote on any matter. the votes must take place at the meetings. You cannot call in, you can't fax, no emails. You must be physically present to make your vote. If a member is recusing, they should leave the room, and the record should note why they're recusing themselves. I had a question not too long ago about someone who was abstaining from taking a vote, but they did not give, they were abstaining from taking a vote on a particular application, but they refused to give a reason as to why. And so the board chair was asking us, well, you know, is that okay? Can they do that? Can we force them to make a decision? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, right? It does kind of muck up the process a little bit because you want to be able to move forward on an application. And if someone is abstaining and you don't have an alternate, then you're kind of in a rough spot if that person is choosing not to vote and you need their vote in order to move the application forward, right? And really it's not illegal. You're not required to provide a reason or rationale for recusing yourself or abstaining. But what you can do, and this isn't, it's not probably the best answer that people will want to hear in this situation, but this is the answer, that you can just continue voting, changing the motion on the application in the time permitted, as many times as you can in the time permitted, like like within that 62-day time period after the public hearing closes, like on a site plan, for instance. Then you just keep changing that motion until it reflects something that everybody can agree on, or it shifts the scales to where there's a clear majority in the vote. And hopefully that person will be able to then vote because there is a motion that they can get behind, right? It's not
but let's be real here. Like, if you're going to sit on your planning board or zoning board, like, you should know that you're going to have to take a vote eventually anyway. Like, if you don't want your opinion to be known on an application either way, then you really shouldn't be a person sitting on you should be a board member. Like,
and
that's your job, is to make the decision.
That's absolutely correct, right? Like, you signed up to do this. Now you should make a decision, but especially if you're not going to provide a rationale, because there's no other, especially if you don't have a board with alternates, there's nothing else that your board can do. You've basically stopped progress on that application forever, right? Until someone else comes on and can make a vote on that application, and it's not going to abstain.
And you're putting your applicants in a tough spot too, because they paid
Absolutely.
to come before your board. So
it's a disservice. It's really a disservice.
I agree.
Where was I? Oh, and also you also want to make alternates. If you have alternates available, you want to make sure that they're up to speed on the application so that they can so that they can make an informed decision about the application. What you should also know is that if you have alternates and you have to call up an alternate because someone's recusing or abstaining or what have you, then that alternate also needs to state for the record that they are up to speed on the details of the application. Okay, that's their responsibility as an alternate. And findings, the findings basically connect the application details to the code requirements and then lays out the rationale for the board's decision and any related conditions that will be applied to the application. They're a very important part of the record, right? They're usually drafted by a municipal attorney, especially for very complex applications, but they should specify, again, how the standards are met, right? What the facts are about the application and how they relate to the standards that are required, right, for that particular development type. You know, as noted by the zoning regulations. And of course, just lost my train of thought. Oh, and of course, if the application does not address the requirements, like if they don't show what the requirements, that the requirements are being met, like let's say, you know, you have setback requirements and they're not even providing you with dimensions of those areas on your plan that they submitted, you're well within your rights to note that they did not provide the information needed to make this decision, right? You want to be very clear that you've done your due diligence as a board member, as a board, to review this application and have compared what has been provided to you to the requirements of your zoning code and your regulations, and this does not meet it, and this is why, because we weren't provided with XYZ information as required by our code. Or if what they provided did meet it, you want to note that as well. You know, XYZ was provided, it complies with the requirements of the code, blah, blah, blah. The application is approved or denied, and this is why, right? If it's approved with conditions, you lay out the conditions and how they relate, and those conditions should relate specifically to the facts of the application and your code, right? It shouldn't be something, you know, far off in left field. You shouldn't have a condition for something like that has nothing to do with that property. For instance, a condition like this application is approved conditioned upon the installation of a sidewalk in the right-of-way. That's not the purview of a property owner, that's the purview of the municipality, right? So your conditions should always jive or align with your findings and the application itself, and you know, the facts of the application. But the findings, that's where you will include those conditions. So I'll just say that again, if hopefully I didn't lose anyone. The application connects the findings connects the application details to the code requirements, the zoning code requirements, and lays out the rationale for the board's decision and notes any related conditions that will be applied, okay? If you have this stuff in writing, it doesn't make you invulnerable to litigation, but it will certainly help if your decision is challenged in court, right? Because you've laid out in detail how the application did or did not meet the requirements of the code and what your response was as a result. And let's be honest, I mean, we're all human. We have memories that fade, right? We can't always rely on ourselves to remember something 100% accurately every time. And as the months go on, you know, you may, hope not, but you might be sued for on an application, and you may not be able to state accurately what the rationale was for a particular decision. But if your findings were thorough, right, and you laid all of that out, then you can refer back to that, and that will, you know, be what helps you in preparing your response to that accusation, right, in court. Again, findings are a very, very important part of the record. You want to insert the findings into the record and the application file. Now, the record itself is a collection of all the evidence presented to the board during the proceedings, and it includes all the things listed here: the application, the plans, photographs, surveys, any correspondence between the applicant and the staff or the municipality with regard to the application itself. The public hearing notice, you want to include that to provide evidence that you did notice the public about the application. Any written comments that were submitted by the public, any other related municipal records that relate to the project, and of course, the decision and the finding statement. And next, Paula will talk about practical advice for board members.
Great. So, of course, we're running out of time.
Yeah.
But to wrap up, we'll just go over some practical bits of advice. And it's funny because our supervisor actually loves these slides more than all the other slides. He's like, this is the real meat and potatoes of this course. So the basics, of course, is attend meetings and be on time. It's respectful to each other as board members. It's respectful of the applicant's time and their money. You want to read application materials in meetings before the meeting. Don't be the board member that sits down and says, so what are you doing before us? Like, what are you here for? Because everybody knows a board member that does that. It's incredibly frustrating for
embarrassing
fellow board members. It's embarrassing. So do your due diligence beforehand. Seek staff assistance before the meeting. Or if you have questions about things, like, feel free to reach out to DOS. We're happy to answer questions. And we are all very aware of people who like to call at 4:30 about a meeting at 6. So feel free to reach out to us on that. Be familiar with sites and projects. So again, we talked about doing those site visits. And sometimes you want to do those site visits at different times of the day to get kind of a different feeling of what's happening at a certain place. So really you can just hit the ground running when the meeting begins. And in your meetings, you want to know your comprehensive plan and your zoning law. Again, make sure that you have the copy that's sitting on the table and it looks like it's well worn and it's not just collecting dust somewhere. And you want to focus on facts and not on your personal opinions. You want to share information with each other as well as with applicants and the public, especially because board members, you might have some board members who are seasoned and might be, professional planners or engineers or whatnot, and they might have a different perspective than everybody else. So sometimes we look to each other as being subject experts on certain things. That can be quite useful. Participate in discussion. Don't be the new board member that, feels intimidated to participate in the meeting, because you know what, if you're with all these other veteran members, if you're new, you may see things from a newer, different perspective that your fellow board members haven't thought about or didn't pick up on. So that could be really helpful. So don't be the board member that just, gets told from, older or like more seasoned members that say like, oh, don't worry about it, just do what I do. Like, you don't want to do that, because you're making decisions that are going to have a long impact on your community. You want to be probing, but not argumentative. You don't want meetings to ever end with people yelling at each other or being nasty with one another, with fellow board members. Like, the state police should not be called to your meeting to like break up fistfights, but we've all heard stories of that happening. So, you want to be respectful to everybody. And you want to stick to the schedule and the agenda. It's respectful to everybody's time. And that's pretty much kind of common sense. And of course, continuing in the meetings, you want to be practical. I mean, your regulations might ask for everything and you're allowed to, but you want to make sure that whatever's happening in your community is going to be good for your community in the future. You want to respect your associates, so respect each other. Be a problem solver, not a problem maker. We've all heard stories of, board members who enjoy trying to make the public cry before them. You don't want to be a board that's known for that. Be very conscious of your body language. Remember, you're supposed to be open-minded and making these decisions based on the facts and the people that come before you. And remember, the public is coming to you because they care about the community as much as you do. So, your opinions might be different, but it's always important to keep that in mind. Everybody deserves that respect, and everybody deserves equal treatment. And some basic final words of wisdom. Be patient with applicants, the process, the public, and with each other. Be persistent, but also be respectful. Never make these things personal. Be transparent and follow the spirit of the open meetings law. As long as you're a community that's trying to do things in the light of sunshine, you're doing the right thing. Know the law, be passionate about your community. I assume that's why you're here. And of course, when you can, have fun. Some days are easier than others, of course. And of course, thank you guys for your service and coming for training this afternoon, because we always appreciate that. And some local sources of assistance. If you're having issues, always feel free to reach out to those county planners. I can never say such wonderful things about them, as well as our regional planning agencies. They're all wonderful. Make sure that you reach out to them. They understand your communities. They're helpful. They're there to help. But you also might have colleges and universities that have, studio projects that might be able to help you. And of course, previous board members, look to your plans and reports. Feel free to always reach out to us as well. That's how you get in touch with us. Nobody's in the office right now, so if you call, you'll talk to our voicemail, but one of us will always give you a call back. That is our email address. You can always get in touch with any of us. You can also get in touch with us via email at firstname.lastname@dos.ny.gov. So for me, that's paula.gilbert. For Ebony, that's ebony.mapp with
two P's.
That's right. And that is our website as well. So I'm sorry, it's 4:02. We went a little over, but we appreciate your time this afternoon. If you have any questions, feel free to type those in right now. I'm not sure if Sarah has any last minute things that she wants to add, but we can do that as well. Any last words of wisdom, Ebony, from you?
No, I just want to echo what you said earlier. Thank you to everyone who's on this call for your willingness to volunteer for your community and be on one of these boards, a planning board or a zoning board. You may not hear thank you all the time, so we want to just tell you thank you for your
Yeah,
service.
we appreciate it. All right, we'll give it another minute, and then if not, you can always send us an email anytime you have questions. We're here as a resource for you. We're one of the only places that has resources for local officials, so feel free to reach out to us when you do have questions.
Yep.
All right.
Well, thank you, everyone.
It's a quiet group.
Yeah.
That's okay. All righty. Well, thank you again, everyone. And I hope everybody stays well.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.